I stood at the altar in my grandmother's wedding dress, holding a microphone instead of a bouquet. 300 guests stared at me in complete silence. My billionaire fiance's face went from confusion to pale horror in seconds, because I wasn't about to say, "I do." I was about to expose everything he'd done, everything he'd hidden, and exactly how he'd used me like a pawn in his billion-dollar game. Before I tell you how I turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into a courtroom, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because you won't believe how this story ends. Trust me, you're gonna want to see this through to the very last word. My name is Simone, and 6 months ago, I thought I'd found my fairy tale. I was 28, working as a pharmaceutical researcher at a mid-sized company in Chicago. I wasn't looking for love. Honestly, I was married to my work, developing medications that could actually help people, that could save lives. That was my passion. Romance could wait, or so I thought. Then I met Lawrence Blackwell at a medical charity gala. I almost didn't go to that event. My best friend practically dragged me there, told me I needed to get out of the lab once in a while. I wore a simple black dress, nothing fancy. I was standing by the bar, checking emails on my phone, when this man approached me. Tall, handsome, impeccably dressed. But what struck me wasn't his looks. It was that he actually asked about my work. Not as small talk, but like he genuinely wanted to know. He asked questions that showed he understood the science. We talked for 2 hours straight. I didn't know who he was at first. When he finally introduced himself properly, I nearly choked on my wine. Lawrence Blackwell, as in heir to the Blackwell pharmaceutical empire. His grandfather had founded the company 60 years ago. It was worth billions, and Lawrence was being groomed to eventually take over, worth $4.2 billion personally. And he was interested in me, plain old Simone from the South Side who still had student loans and drove a 10-year-old Honda. The next 4 months felt like a dream. Lawrence wasn't like the wealthy men you see in movies, all arrogant and dismissive. He was thoughtful. He remembered that I liked my coffee with oat milk and cinnamon. He'd send me articles about new research in my field. He introduced me to his world slowly, never making me feel less than. When he proposed after 4 months, part of me thought it was crazy fast, but the rest of me, the part that was falling deeply in love, said yes without hesitation. My family was skeptical. My mother pulled me aside and asked if I was sure I knew what I was getting into. My father wanted to know more about Lawrence's character, his values. But they saw how happy I was, and eventually they gave us their blessing. His family was different. Polite but distant. Cold handshakes and tight smiles. I told myself they just needed time to warm up to me. I told myself a lot of things back then. The wedding planning became this elaborate production. I'd imagined something small and intimate, but Lawrence's mother insisted we needed something that reflected the family's standing. 300 guests, a venue that cost more than most people's houses, a wedding budget that made me nauseous. I went along with it because I thought that's what you do when you marry into a family like his. You compromise, you adapt. But then, 3 months before the wedding, something happened that changed everything. I was working late in the lab, reviewing data from a clinical trial for a new diabetes medication our company was developing. Something didn't add up. The numbers from week 3 didn't match the follow-up results from week 6. Some patients who'd shown improvement suddenly had their data listed differently. When I dug deeper, I found what looked like deliberate alterations. Someone had manipulated the research data to make the medication appear safer and more effective than it actually was. I reported it to my supervisor immediately. I expected concern, maybe an internal investigation. Instead, I got a closed-door meeting where I was told, very politely, to stay in my lane, focus on my assigned work. Don't worry about things above my pay grade. The way he said it made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a mistake. This was intentional, and people knew about it. I couldn't let it go. 2 months before my wedding, I started digging deeper on my own time. I discovered the medication was being fast-tracked for FDA approval despite serious safety concerns. The company was pushing hard to get it to market quickly. And then I found the connection that made my blood run cold. The Blackwell family had a 40% stake in my company. I'd never known this. Lawrence had never mentioned it. Not once in all our conversations about my work had he told me his family partially owned the company I worked for. When I asked him about it, casual at first, he brushed it off, said he didn't really involve himself in the family's business dealings, told me I was stressing too much about work when I should be focused on our wedding. That response felt wrong. Lawrence had always been interested in my work before. Now, suddenly, he wanted me to stop asking questions? 6 weeks before the wedding, I did something I'm not proud of, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. A colleague, another researcher who'd noticed the same irregularities, reached out to me privately. She was scared, but she was also brave. She had access to internal emails, documents that never should have seen the light of day. What she showed me destroyed the man I thought I was going to marry. Lawrence wasn't just aware of what was happening, he was orchestrating it. The medication we were developing could cause severe liver damage with long-term use. They knew this. The internal projections showed that at least 15% of patients could develop serious complications within 2 years. But the profit projections were massive, $800 million annually, and they'd specifically planned to market it primarily to low-income communities, people on cheaper insurance plans, people who wouldn't have the resources to fight back if something went wrong. Email after email, I saw Lawrence's name, approving strategies, pushing timelines, dismissing safety concerns. This wasn't some distant family business he barely knew about. This was his project, his plan, his calculated decision to put profits over human lives. But the worst part, the part that shattered me completely, came when I realized why he'd pursued me in the first place. I was the lead researcher on the preliminary trials. My name was on the initial safety reports. My reputation in the field, my credentials, they gave the medication credibility. He didn't fall in love with me at that gala. He targeted me. The whole romance, the thoughtful gestures, the proposal, all of it was calculated. I was never his future wife. I was a PR asset. I spent 3 days in my apartment crying. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd look at my engagement ring and feel sick. Part of me wanted to call everything off, expose him immediately, and never see his face again. But another part of me, the part that was raised by a woman who taught me that when someone knocks you down, you get back up swinging, that part started planning something else. I could cancel the wedding and fade away. I could go to the authorities, but the Blackwell family had an army of lawyers who could tie things up in courts for years. Or I could use Lawrence's own plan against him. The wedding was going to have media coverage, influential guests from the pharmaceutical industry, politicians, board members for multiple companies. He'd planned this elaborate showcase of power and prestige. I was going to turn it into his reckoning. 2 weeks before the wedding, I worked with my colleague to copy everything, every file, every email, every financial projection, every piece of medical data that showed how dangerous this medication really was. I contacted a journalist I'd known since college, someone I trusted completely. I laid out everything, and we prepared a story that would publish the moment I gave the signal. I also submitted an anonymous but detailed complaint to the FDA with copies of all the evidence, requesting they have agents available on a specific date and time. I found lawyers who specialized in corporate fraud and whistleblower cases, people who worked pro bono for cases exactly like this. Everything was set in motion. All I had to do was keep pretending, keep smiling through dress fittings, keep nodding through rehearsal dinner speeches about how perfect we were together, keep letting Lawrence kiss me goodnight while knowing exactly what kind of monster he really was. My mother knew something was wrong. She'd catch me staring into space, see the circles under my eyes, but I couldn't tell her, couldn't risk anything leaking before I was ready. The night before the wedding, I barely slept at all. I lay in bed, going over every detail, every possible thing that could go wrong. At 3 in the morning, I almost backed out, almost convinced myself I was being crazy, vindictive, that there had to be another way. Then I thought about the people who would take that medication, the single mothers working 2 jobs who couldn't afford better insurance, the elderly people on fixed incomes, the families who would trust a doctor's prescription, trust a pharmaceutical company's promises, and end up sick or worse. I thought about how Lawrence had looked me in the eyes and lied for months, how he'd touched me, made love to me, all while using me as a tool. No, there was no other way. The wedding day came. I put on my grandmother's dress, the one she'd worn when she married my grandfather 63 years ago. She'd been a strong woman, a woman who'd fought through segregation and discrimination to build a life for her family. I looked at myself in the mirror and asked her spirit to give me strength for what I was about to do. 300 guests filled that venue. I saw politicians I'd only seen on television, celebrities, pharmaceutical executives whose companies were worth billions, media photographers positioned perfectly to capture every moment. Lawrence stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, looking confident and happy. His family sat in the front row, my family on the other side. If you'd taken a picture right then, it would have looked like a fairy tale. I walked down that aisle with my father's arm in mine. He whispered, "You okay, baby girl?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. When I reached the altar and Lawrence took my hands, he smiled at me like I was his whole world. That smile used to make my heart race. Now it made my skin crawl. The officiant began the ceremony. Traditional words about love and commitment and two people joining their lives together. I let him get through the opening, let everyone settle into that comfortable wedding atmosphere. Then, right before we got to the vows, I pulled my hands from Lawrence's and stepped back. "Before we continue," I said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "there's something everyone needs to hear." I reached into the hidden pocket my seamstress had sewn into my dress and pulled out a small microphone. I'd worked with the wedding planner, told her it was for a surprise speech. She'd helped me connected to the venue's sound system. Lawrence's face shifted from confusion to irritation. "Simone, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I said, and my voice carried through the entire room now. "I'm telling everyone here exactly who you are and what you've done." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked out at 300 faces staring at me in shock. Cameras were rolling. This was it. I started talking. I told them about the diabetes medication, about the manipulated data and the hidden safety concerns, about the projected profits and the targeted demographics. I'd arranged for the venue's projection screen, the one that was supposed to show our wedding photos, to display documents instead. My journalist friend was in the tech booth making it happen. Email after email appeared on that massive screen. Lawrence's name, his directives, his complete knowledge of everything they were hiding. Financial projections that put dollar amounts on acceptable casualties. Medical data showing the real dangers they were suppressing. Lawrence tried to grab the microphone from me. "He's not well," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "She's having some kind of breakdown. This is all—" "It's all true," I cut him off, "and everyone here knows it now. Your board members, sitting in rows 5 and 7, they knew too. The emails show exactly who approved what and when." His mother stood up, frantically gesturing to someone to cut the sound system. But it was too late. My journalist friend was already live streaming everything. Guests had their phones out, filming, texting, posting. The story was spreading in real time. I showed the financial projections, explained in clear terms how they'd planned to profit from other people's suffering. I showed which board members had known, and several people in that room started trying to leave. I revealed the FDA complaint, mentioned that federal investigators were already involved. And then I delivered the final blow. "Lawrence didn't fall in love with me," I said, looking directly at him. "He targeted me because I was the lead researcher. My name, my reputation was supposed to make this poison more credible. This whole relationship, this entire engagement, it was a business strategy." The look on his face was pure hatred. All that charm, that carefully constructed persona, it crumbled away, and I saw who he really was. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed. "No," I said, and I felt my grandmother's strength flowing through me. "You did. You destroyed it the moment you decided money was worth more than human lives. You destroyed it when you used me. This is just consequences catching up." Lawrence tried to leave, pushing past guests toward the exit, but there were FDA agents waiting outside. not to arrest him yet, but to make it very clear he was under investigation, and attempting to flee would only make things worse. He stood there, trapped by his own arrogance, his own certainty that he was untouchable. I took off my engagement ring and placed it on the altar. Then I walked back down that aisle, still in my grandmother's dress, with my head held high. My family joined me, my mother's arm around my waist, my father's hand on my shoulder. Behind us, the wedding had dissolved into absolute chaos. The story went viral within hours. #BlackwellExposed was trending worldwide by that evening. The FDA launched a full, formal investigation. Stock prices for Blackwell Pharmaceutical plummeted 43% in 2 days. Board members started resigning. Lawsuits began piling up. 2 weeks later, the medication development was officially halted. Multiple executives, including Lawrence, were indicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and endangering public safety. The company lost billions in value. Lawrence's perfect life, his untouchable status, his entire empire built on other people's pain, it all came crashing down. I lost my job, of course. The company retaliated by firing me, claimed budget cuts. I expected that. But what I didn't expect was how many doors would open afterward. Advocacy groups reached out. Other pharmaceutical companies wanted to consult with me on ethics oversight. I started speaking publicly about corporate accountability and whistleblower protection. I wrote about my experience, and my words reached people who'd been through similar betrayals. 6 months later, Lawrence took a plea deal to avoid trial. 5 years in federal prison, massive fines, and he's banned from ever holding an executive position in any pharmaceutical company again. Blackwell Pharmaceutical was taken over by new leadership, people committed to actually doing things right. My life is different now, harder in some ways. I'm rebuilding my career from scratch. Dating again feels complicated because trust doesn't come easy anymore. But when I look in the mirror, I see someone I'm proud of. I see my grandmother's granddaughter. I see a woman who chose truth over comfort, justice over silence. I still have that wedding dress hanging in my closet. Sometimes I look at it and remember standing at that altar, microphone in hand, speaking truth to power. It reminds me that the strongest thing you can do isn't always saying yes. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's saying, I won't stay silent. I won't be used, and I won't let you get away with this. That's my story. The wedding that never was, but changed everything. If this moved you, if it made you think twice about the people we trust and the systems we believe in, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, what would you have done in my position? Would you have gone through with exposing him like that, or would you have chosen differently? And remember this, sometimes the strongest thing you can say isn't I do. Sometimes it's I won't stay silent. No matter what it costs you, no matter who tries to make you small, your voice matters. Your truth matters. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong out there.